Our next panelist is Elissa Alben. She serves as International Trade Counsel on the Senate Finance Committee Democratic staff. Elissa's responsibilities include matters relating to the TPP, general trade issues involving the Asia Pacific, the WTO, and trade enforcement. Elissa came to the committee after 8 years in the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, where she served as Deputy Assistant USTR for Enforcement and Monitoring, as well as Associate General Counsel. At USTR, she helped oversee a wide range of enforcement matters arising from the WTO and U.S. free trade agreements. And she served as Chief Lawyer for KORUS and the United States-Oman Free Trade Agreement, and advised on other issues such as U.S. tariff programs, market access, customs, and telecommunications. Prior to USTR, Ms. Alben was an associate in the International Trade Department at Steptoe & Johnson. Elissa.
Okay, so recently I had the opportunity to spend some close personal time with a bill that Senator Wyden did in 1998 called the Internet Tax Freedom Act. And I won't go into great detail about why I had to do that. It's a little too painful to recount, but I want to talk about it for a second because I think it'll give you a bit of a picture of how Senator Wyden has been coming at these digital trade issues in the context of TPP and sort of how we view what is, the new challenges that TPP has revealed about bringing digital issues into our trade agreements and where that may go in the future. So the ITFA was a bill that established a moratorium on taxes on internet access and discriminatory taxes on electronic commerce here in the United States. But what's interesting about it is that in that legislation, which Senator Wyden championed, there were what might have been the first attempt to establish trade negotiating objectives on e-commerce. So those negotiating objectives, if you look at them, they're all about non-discrimination and duties and taxes. These are sort of the traditional trade concepts getting pulled and extended to this new idea of e-commerce. And another aspect of it is a sort of classic trade policy making thing that we do, where we take what we think is a great domestic policy idea and we extend it into our trade agreements. We want to lock it in to set a high US standard all across the world. So that's sort of the first aspect of ITFA, and what you can see that in the TPP, many of the TPP commitments that are really important in digital trade. So those kind of were the baseline digital trade commitments, and I think that they reflected a lot of those early commitments that are in our early trade agreements. So where TPP got more interesting is, I think in our current environment, what we were seeing is that 10 years on, we're not the only players in the digital policy space anymore. What we were finding is that other countries are coming up with their own rules for how to manage digital trade. And sometimes those rules are, just a different approach to doing something that we do here in the United States. Other times they're a bit more nefarious. And we had to figure out in TPP how to deal with the barriers that resulted from those new regimes overseas. So the cross-border data flows and data localization commitments in TPP were very important because they required us to look at what it was to us, what it meant to be promoting a free and open internet, and how we could ensure that other countries were not adopting policies that were contrary to that overall objective, which, again, is something that's been very important to Senator Wyden domestically for many years. So it was, but the free and open internet isn't something that's enshrined in one law. You're not just exporting it into our trade agreement from some US statute. We really had to sit down and figure out what we meant by a free and open internet and how we could take the commitments that the framework that we have here in the United States and make sure that we were locking in the best aspects of it overseas. So that is a very important development in TPP. And I think it was a lot harder in some ways to do than to just, than those earlier commitments, which were really sort of taking these baseline principles of trade and bringing them into the digital space. The third part of TPP that was really challenging to us and presents a sort of new area for us reflects what I think you can see when you look at Ambassador Hollyman's Digital 24. The first thing that you see from that list, at least that we could see, is that digital trade is not a silo issue. It's no longer just in Chapter 14 of the trade agreement. Of his 24, only 7 of those provisions are just in the e-commerce chapter. So digital trade is a cross-cutting issue. It affects all kinds of sectors and it affects all kinds of companies, and it has implications for commitments all over these agreements. So that's a great source of strength in a way. It allows us in Congress who believe in the importance of the digital economy to have broader coalitions to advocate for a better approach to digital in our trade agreements. But it also creates a new challenge. So, as we look at TPP, we start to see, if you look at it in this cross-cutting way, some of the ideas that worked in the traditional space may not work quite as well for the digital space. And we've locked some of those ideas in our trade agreements maybe 10 years ago. Maybe we thought they were great policy at the time. But as the internet economy sort of changes how we're doing business, that is going to force us to look again and take another hard look at some of these ideas that seem to work really well, but may not work for us going forward. So I think that was one of the biggest struggles in TPP as we start to define what is a good framework for digital trade in our trade agreements. We are increasingly coming up against looking at taking a second look at some of these sort of bedrock principles that we've had in our agreements for years that were designed to address a somewhat different economy. So that's sort of how we've been looking at these TPP commitments. TPP, again, we regard many of these commitments as important improvements that really do set a much higher bar going forward. But we can see clearly that this digital space, from a policy standpoint, is presenting some really interesting new challenges for us as policymakers. And so we expect that we are going to continue to have some very robust conversations in the years to come.